Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. Of course, it's Friday, so we're almost at the weekend. We're really close. Good morning, Casey. Casey's ready for the weekend with four S's. That's a big yes. Tika, good morning to you. Monica, good morning. Manish is here. Good morning, Manish. Good morning, Baha. Baha is absolutely ready for the weekend. Jenna, good morning, Jenna. Karen here, of course, of course, as if I should even ask that question. Masheed's here. Good morning, Masheed. Um, yeah, I'm ready for the weekend too. Uh, Honestly, the whole week feels like a weekend. Well, lucky you. Um, but I think I know what you mean. The the most of the days feel a lot more similar than they used to, right? When we used to go physically go to school and then come home, and so yeah, I get it. Every day kind of feels like the last. Manish, I get that. Okay, so we've got about 8 people here. Um, yeah, let's dive into this. Okay, if you want to throw anything else into the live stream chat, of course, go ahead and I'll address it as we go. Okay, but let's dive in here. So we're talking about oppression and power, and I think we'll finish off talking about those two topics um, in general today. Obviously, different types of oppression will remain the focus of this course until the end. Um, but we'll end this place where we're just talking generally about what oppression is and how power works and things like that. Is that true? Will we finish today? Actually, no, I don't think we will. I've got a little bit more for you maybe on Monday, just a touch. We're almost done though. Good morning, Erica. Okay, so when we left off yesterday, we were talking about discrimination, and we said that discrimination is action based on people's prejudices, right? So people hold prejudicial ideas, stereotypes with some kind of emotional investment in them. And when people act, whether they actually do or say something, or whether they specifically don't do something or don't say something, that's discrimination, right? And sometimes discrimination is very obvious, of course. People can um, overtly say things or do things, but then sometimes discrimination is not as easy to see. And again, sometimes that's the stuff I prefer to focus on because the obvious things are obvious, right? People can clearly see and identify when discrimination is happening, but sometimes it's not quite clear, and that's that's the stuff we need to dig into because that's the things that people don't often don't understand very clearly. We talked very quickly yesterday about a few studies that demonstrated this. Good morning, Ivan. A few studies that demonstrated this. And so we talked about this study out of the University of Chicago where these two researchers mailed out a bunch of fake resumes. And they, on the top of the resumes, they used some fake names. Some of those fake names were sort of stereotypically white sounding, like Greg Baker or Emily Walsh or something like that. And then some of the names had stereotypically black names, so things like Jamal Johnson or Lakeisha Washington or things like that. So they sent out these resumes, half of them with these white sounding names, half of them with black sounding names. And interestingly, but I guess not surprisingly, because you all kind of guessed how this study would pan out, um, even though the resumes had similar credentials and similar levels of experience, black applicants received fewer callbacks. And even in cases where they had more experience and their credentials were better, they still received fewer callbacks. And the authors say that this kind of discrimination was consistent across different types of industries, different sort of pay levels of job, but also within the two cities as well. They saw the same pattern. And so the question, of course, was why, right? Why are we seeing this pattern? And the position I was taking, and I think what the article suggests as well, is that what we're seeing here is evidence of systemic racism. We're seeing people acting on stereotypes, but probably not in a conscious way, right? So I said, are there some racist hiring managers who don't want to hire a black applicant? Yeah, there probably are, right? Are there a lot of them? It's difficult to tell. Probably not so many, but again, we don't know for sure. But what is definitely happening is that the names, the stereotypically black names on the top of those resumes trigger a set of unconscious filters, right? And so the way I was kind of imagining this, or sort of asking you to think about it, was those kind of very uncool flip down sunglasses that you see older people wear sometimes. Sorry, older people. And what those kind of lenses are lenses that are made up of stereotypical ideas and prejudices that are circulating around society and that people absorb. And often they absorb those ideas without sort of knowing that they're there. And so when they see a resume with a black sounding name, those lenses flip down, and all of a sudden this person's experience and this person's credentials are being seen through this lens of stereotype and prejudice. And again, in many cases, it's probably the person who's looking at the resume probably doesn't realize this is happening, okay? These things happen often at a subconscious level. And so the end result is discrimination, but the people who are reading these resumes are not trying to discriminate in any way. Some of them probably maybe, but many of them likely are not. But the pattern happens anyway, right? Black applicants are still discriminated against, even though people might not be trying to do it, and even though people might not be aware of doing it. And so again, that kind of demonstrates how powerful socialization and social messages are, because people absorb those messages and act on them, sometimes without really knowing that they're doing it, okay? And it has real effects on people, right? And the other thing I said here, and this will become important a little bit later, is that the white sounding names do not trigger any racial filters. And why was that? Well, it's because dominant groups are usually seen as the default, okay? The sort of normal thing. How do I more properly explain this? So in the case of race, white people are often seen as not having race, right? Of not being ethnic. And so it's not that there are positive associations with the white names. It's just that there are no obvious negative ones. It's gonna get noisy for a second, hang on. Just dragging the garbage bin out in the alleyway. Good morning, Sam. Okay, now that that's done. So it's not that white sounding names or whiteness in general has positive associations. It's just that it doesn't really have any stereotypically negative ones. And so when hiring managers look at a resume like this, they just see the qualifications. They're not making any sort of associations. They're not looking through any kind of lens. And again, doesn't just have to do with race. That has to do with all other this has to do with all other types of oppression and minoritized and dominant groups. I have a few examples of that, but maybe I'll just leave it and I'll see how we do going forward, okay? So the other study we talked about yesterday was Barack Obama. What color is he? Is he black or white? And I think we mostly agreed that he was black, and that he had identified himself as black to the world and to the US population. But interestingly, people saw him differently depending on their political association, right? And so people who were liberals or Democrats, people who sort of belonged to the same political party or political ideology as Barack Obama, they were more likely to see him as lighter skinned. And people who disagreed with him or had different political views were more likely to see him as darker, right? And we said that the reason for that, or at least the leader of the study's explanation for that, was positive associations with whiteness and lightness in Western cultures, and the tendency of people to view people in your social group more positively, okay? And so that had to do with Tajfel's social identity theory that we talked about the day before. Okay, and that led us to this concept of privilege. Now, privilege is a tricky thing to understand sometimes. And I showed you, I had you watch that video with James Corden, and I think James Corden was doing a little bit of acting. He was kind of pretending he was a little more clueless than he was. But often people are a little bit clueless about it. They don't really understand what it is. They don't really understand how it works. And because of that, they're not really sure how to feel about it. And so you kind of saw his writer Olivia Harwood and James Corden kind of going through this thing as she tried to explain what privilege was, and he went through kind of a series of emotions as he tried to figure out what it was and how to feel about it. But let's go to the questions now. You'll notice that the article I had you read was it was really one that was aimed at school psychologists. In the past, you'll notice in the article they mention an article called "White Privilege: Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack." That's a very popular paper that people read when talking about privilege. It's probably one of the earlier papers talking about privilege that people cite. I've always found the metaphor that Peggy McIntosh, who wrote the article, I've always found that this metaphor of a knapsack or a backpack, I've always found it kind of weird and awkward. It's not really how I think about privilege, and so I've always kind of tripped over it. And so I tried to find something different for you this time that maybe was more clear or maybe not. But we'll find out in a minute, I guess. So I had you read this article, which I'm sure you did, and then I asked you a number of questions. And the first question I asked you was this. I said, what does it mean? What does it mean to have privilege? What does having privilege mean? What does having privilege mean? What does it mean to have privilege? Okay, so Casey says, having privilege means always having the upper hand when it comes to almost everything. Okay. Yes and no. Yes and no. We'll come back to that one in a sec, Casey. Manish says, having rights and advantages of being something important. Okay. You can do things easier than others. That's a little bit of a part of it too. Let's see, what else? Dika says a privilege is a Special right, and you have an advantage in something. Okay, yep. Baha says to have a special right or preference over than others. Okay, good. Okay, I'll see if anything else comes up there. You're all kind of in the ballpark here, and yeah. What I'll do here is I'm just gonna jump ahead, and I have a slide here that says what it is. And so you are right in that um, privilege gives advantages or favors or benefits to members of a dominant group, and those advantages or benefits are at the expense of minoritized groups. And we should also remember that privilege can operate on all levels. And so it can be between people, or it can be on a cultural or an institutional level. Okay, so this is a difficult concept to understand. And often it's a difficult concept to understand because it's often invisible. Okay, so where do we start? If we look at if I look at myself, for instance, so I live here in Canada and I am a white person, okay, and that has benefited me unquestionably, right? White people are the dominant group in Canada. White people control social institutions, and so I have advantages. I have benefits that people of color do not have. Now, where it gets tricky is when you try to figure out where those advantages are, because sometimes they're not so visible, particularly for someone like me, particularly in the dominant group. Now, have I benefited from the race that I am? Yeah, I have. When? That's more tricky, right? Because most people aren't aware of when their race or their gender or their sexuality or their nationality, most people aren't quite aware of when it is benefiting them, okay? Because most people don't say, we're going to hire you because you're white, or, I'm not going to pull you over as a cop because you're white. People don't usually say or do things so clearly, so overtly. And so even though people of a certain race or gender or sexuality or whatever, even though they might be benefited, it's often hard for them to know when they're being benefited and how. One of the ways that you can think about this is think about a river or a stream, okay? So the river is kind of running and there's a fish in the river, okay? Now, if the fish swims with the current, so the current's going one way and the fish swims that way, the fish doesn't really feel the current at all, right? The fish gets where it's going, but it doesn't really feel the motion of the river. It just kind of gets carried along and it goes where it wants to go. And so that's kind of what it's like to have privilege, is you're kind of moving in the direction of the current. The current is pushing you along, but you don't really feel it. You're just swimming and it feels like the water around you is not moving. However, if the fish is going the other way and going against the current, the fish will feel it, right? The water is pushing it in the face and the fish is going to have to work a lot harder to get where it needs to go. And that's what it's like not having privilege, is that things become more difficult. I asked you to watch that TikTok video by that young man because he identifies a bunch of things that people with privilege don't have to worry about, right? He says these are things that his mom taught him growing up, and she taught him, don't put your hands in your pockets, don't wear a hoodie, or don't put the hood of your hoodie up. Don't go outside without your shirt on. Don't touch anything you're not buying. Never leave the store without a receipt. don't leave your house without an ID, right? And so all of these are rules that his mom taught him to follow. Now, those rules, for the most part, don't apply to white people. White parents don't raise their children and tell them these rules, right? Because white people, this is in the US, of course, white people are not treated and not seen the same as Black Americans are. And so for this young man and for his mom, they are playing by a slightly different set of rules in the United States. And the fact that his mother has to teach him these rules at all is part of it, shows that other people have privilege, right? White parents don't have to teach their kids all about how to dress so that the police don't give them trouble, right? White parents don't have to educate their children in, when you get stopped by the police, here's what you should do. And that's part of privilege, right? Is that white people can look at the police and not be afraid of them. Whereas for Black Americans, it's a very different story, right? Good morning, Jimmy. So that's part of what happens with privilege, is that some people have advantages that other people do not. And part of having privilege is that you often don't notice that you have it. Okay. And so again, it's like the fish swimming with the current, right? And so if we think about the TikTok video and this young man with this set of rules, white people may not realize they have privilege because when they leave the house without their ID, with their hood up, and they go into a store and touch things they're not buying and drive around with their music too loud, what happens? Nothing happens, right? They just go about their lives. And so their privilege remains invisible to them because nothing happens, right? White kids, white guys can break all of these rules and nothing happens, right? But young men like this young Black American here, when he breaks the rules, bad things can happen to him, right? They can attract the attention of the police, and then the police may not deal with him in a compassionate and equal way. So maybe this is a tricky question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The second question I asked you was this. I asked you, how does privilege benefit those in the dominant group? And how does it negatively affect those in the minoritized group? We can just start with the dominant group if we want, how privilege benefits people. Okay, so Casey says, dominant group can greatly influence social and political decisions. Yeah, that's true. And of course, that has to do with all dominant groups, whether we're talking white people, whether we're talking males, whether we're talking people with lots of money, whether we're talking about heterosexuals, whether we're talking about citizens, whatever dominant group we're talking about, yeah, they can influence social and political decisions in their country. The other thing I'll just bring up with reference to Casey's comment here is that a lot of what I'm talking about is framed within North America, right? So we're talking about white people as the dominant group and Black people and people of color as the minoritized group. But of course, that's specific to certain countries, right? And so if we go to China, for instance, and some people are in China, but if you go to China, white people are not the dominant group, right? Chinese people are the dominant group. And so they are the group that has social power, right? They're the ones that have privilege. If I go to China, I will have a different relationship, right? Because I'm not necessarily in the dominant group anymore. Within China, Chinese people are, right? So the who is in the dominant group and who is in the minoritized group changes depending on where you are. And so we're kind of talking based on North America. Within different countries, the groups are different, right? The groups are different, and the power relationship between them is different as well. So yeah, you're totally right, Casey. I just based on what you said, I just thought it was a good opportunity to say that. So Karen says the dominant group lives more comfortable lives with little or no significant inconveniences. Yeah, it's true, and it doesn't mean that people with privilege don't have perfect lives, of course, and of course they struggle with different things. Sometimes bad things happen to people in dominant groups, but again, a lot of the disadvantages that affect minoritized groups do not apply to the dominant group. Okay, but yes, Karen, you're absolutely right. Yeah, so dominant groups have more power: institutional power, political power, and social power. They have all of those. Erica says the dominant group can live their life without having to worry about unimportant things. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no, right? Again, people in dominant groups still have to live in the world, and they still bad things happen to them. They struggle with things. There are inconveniences, of course, but again, there's a whole other set of concerns that apply to minoritized groups that do not apply to dominant group, right? So that's you're very right, Erica. I'm just kind of giving some context here. Dominant groups, yeah, they won't get that weird look. Yeah, so and part of that weird look, Baha, I think we can tie to those lenses, right? Those sort of racial filters that flip down. And so when people see a white guy walking down the street, he's just a white guy, right? But when they see someone of a minoritized group, suddenly all of these stereotypes kind of influence how they see that person, right? And again, I'm certainly not saying that this is right or normal or acceptable. I'm just saying that this is how things work, okay? Minna says having the privilege on something, if you knew it or not, helps you in ways. Yeah, it's true, right? So privilege makes things easier for people in the dominant group. But again, in many cases, it's not often clear why or what benefits someone in the dominant group gets, right? Yeah, okay. Those in the dominant group are more often privileged in terms of economy and politics. That is often true. That is also true. But actually, what I'll mention, Thika, here, and it's something that came up with James Corden too, is when Olivia, in the video, when Olivia said that James had privilege, James said, oh gosh, I don't have privilege because, I didn't grow up wealthy, and we, camped in this crappy place. We didn't go on big holidays. So he was talking about his economic status, right? And so one thing that I'll bring up here and that we'll come back to later is the idea of intersectionality, okay? And so if you think about an intersection, usually the way that we use that word is when there's two streets that cross each other, right? That's at the intersection. And so privilege operates differently for different social groups, but remember what we said about a week or so ago, we said that all of us are members of multiple social groups at the same time. So what James Corden was saying was that, oh, I can't have privilege because I don't come from a wealthy family. And that's true, right? If we look economically speaking, if we look at social or economic class, yeah, James' family probably didn't come from a dominant group. The dominant group is the people with lots of money and property and millions and millions of dollars and things like that. They're the dominant group. And so James Corden's family doesn't come from that amount of money. And so his family, he started out in a minoritized group in terms of class or economic status. But he's also white. That makes him part of the dominant group in terms of race. He's also a man, which makes him part of the dominant group in terms of gender. So James has multiple identities which intersect, they cross over, right? Sometimes in some cases, he's in a minoritized group. Well, probably not anymore because he's making money, right? But sometimes he's in a minoritized group. Sometimes he's in a dominant group. And of course, that applies to all of us, right? We are, at the same time, we are simultaneously in different social groups. And some of those groups have power and some of them don't, okay? And so that's kind of what James Corden was saying. And so so it helps him in a way that his I'm not sure how I started that out. I'm just gonna leave it. Thika says, that's where I was talking about. It was Thika's comment there. Those in the dominant group are often more privileged in terms of economy and politics. Yes, that's true. There is some overlap and connection between whiteness and economic power, but of course it doesn't mean that all white people have sort of massive economic power, right? That's not entirely true. That's two different things, but they do have a connection. Okay, so you're definitely not wrong, Thika. But again, the problem with this is that it's very complex, and there's lots of different there's different social groups with different amounts of power, and those groups are kind of connected in various ways. Okay. So I'll ask you this. Are people who have privilege doing something wrong? Are they doing something wrong? Should they feel bad? Should they feel guilty or sad or like they're bad people? Or how should we look at people with, hey Krish, how should we look at people who have privilege? Are they bad? Are they doing something wrong? Okay, so Karen says, if they use it to suppress the minority groups, then yes. Okay, well, definitely, right? If you have power and you consciously use it to disadvantage other people or to discriminate against other people, then yeah, that's a jerky thing to do, right? So yeah, I agree with you. There. What do you think? Are people who have privilege doing something wrong? I know this is a tough question, but don't be scared. You can do it. You can say yes. You can say no. You can say maybe. Tika says if they abuse their privileges to cause the wrong things. Okay, yeah. So if people, okay. Baha agrees with Karen. Okay. Jimmy says absolutely no. Okay. Let's see what else we think here. Sam says, no, not everyone that has privilege are bad. You cannot assume everyone with privilege is bad. Okay. Okay. Okay, so it's certainly true that some people who are in dominant groups abuse that power, right? They consciously and deliberately discriminate against minoritized groups, right? That's very true. And if you do that, that's bad. You're being a jerk. Stop it, right? I think we can probably agree on that. But I'm going to try to side with Erica here, and I'm going to say no, okay? And here's why I'm saying it. Because having privilege is not really anyone's fault, okay? Most of the societies we live in, no matter where on the globe you come from, men are the dominant group. And so, guys out there, you have privilege. You have male privilege in really whatever society you are, whether you're in your home country, whether you're here in Canada, you have male privilege. And that privilege gives you certain advantages and benefits over women within those countries. And so, does that make you bad? No, it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because privilege is something social. It has to do with the way that society is built. It has to do with the way that society operates. And again, all of us are just little pieces in this societal machine. And so it's not really anyone's fault that they are kind of born who they are, right? We're born into a family that is a certain economic class, right? Maybe we're from a rich family or from a middle class family or a poor family. We're born into a certain skin color, right? That we have no real control over. We're born as a certain gender. We are taught a certain culture. We have a certain sexuality. We have a nationality. All of these things are parts of our identity, and really we don't choose any of them. Okay, so we just kind of are who we are. And so I think the best way for us to view this is not that, you know, some people are bad and some people are good, right? People with privilege are bad, people without privilege are good. I think the best way to view this problem is to say that we have a problem with the way our society works, right? We have a bunch of social messages and prejudicial ideas that are circulating around that are untrue and unhelpful. We have constructed a society that has advantaged some people and disadvantaged others, and it's advantaged people based on things that are beyond their control, their race, their gender, their sexuality, and so on. And so really what we need to do if we want to point the finger at something, if we want to figure out what needs to change, it's our social system, right? It's our society that needs to change, and we can all kind of be on the same team in order to do that. And so I'm going to suggest that, you know, again, if you're discriminating against people on purpose, if you are racist or sexist or abusing your power, yeah, that's bad, and you need to stop right away. But many people who have privilege, again, don't realize that they have it, don't know what it is, and really aren't doing anything wrong. And so there's lots of white people out there that are just going about their lives trying to be good people, right? There's lots of men out there who are going about their lives trying to be good people. Do they have privilege? Yes, they do. Do they all realize it? Not necessarily. Are they doing something wrong? Not really. Could they be doing something better? Yeah, they could, right? And in the video with James Corden, Olivia outlines what you can do. And so Olivia says to James that, well, actually, I think I'm about to answer. I think I'm about to answer this question here, but I think I'll do it anyway. Olivia answers that question for James, right? She says, you can, number one, be aware of your privilege, right? That's a good thing to know that you have it and to know that it benefits you. And then you can use it, right? And one of the ways that people can use their privilege for good is to speak up, right? If I take this back to guys who are listening out there, males have privilege in that people tend to, it can be used to help minorities. Yeah. So men out there, men tend to get listened to, okay? In most societies, men tend to be taken seriously. Women are sometimes taken seriously as well, but to a lesser degree than men. And so men can stand up and speak up for the rights of women. You can use your privilege. The fact that people listen to you allows you to speak up for them and make people aware of the problem, right? She says we can understand ourselves by learning to see one's own privilege. Yeah, that's an important part. Learning to see how you are advantaged in society is an important part of using your privilege for good, and then eventually for moving toward a society that is more equal, right? If I understand the ways in which I am privileged, then I can start looking at ways of how do we create that balance, right? How do we give people the advantages that I have and make sure that I don't have any unfair advantages over them, right? Mitch says, yeah, to help people who are focused and don't have privilege. Yeah, exactly. Tika, privileges can do good. They can use their privileges to help the weaker. So in a way, privilege is strength, right? And so even though this isn't what we're talking about right now, Casey says yes, if it can be used to implement or create something that can benefit everyone in a good way. And even though in the James Corden video, even though they kind of dismissed it, James Corden has celebrity privilege, right? He is a well-known celebrity that everyone knows, and people tend to listen to celebrities and believe what they say, even when the celebrities don't know what they're talking about. In this case, he kind of does, but even when celebrities don't know what they're talking about, people still listen to them. And so in this case, James Corden is using his kind of white privilege, but he's also using his celebrity privilege, right? He knows that when he goes on his show and does this little segment, or when he posts it on Instagram, millions of people are going to see it, right? People are going to listen to James Corden. I'm on YouTube right now, which is scary. I'm on YouTube right now. Very few people are going to listen to me, right? Very few people are going to see this except for all of you guys. But James Corden, he puts his clip on YouTube and millions of people are going to see it, right? And so he can use his privilege, he can use his power for good. He can use it to raise awareness, right? And so again, privilege, if people abuse their privilege, that's bad. But all of us have some kind of privilege, or most of us have some kind of privilege depending on the group that we belong to. And we can use that to help other people, right? And the first step is kind of recognizing the ways in which we have privilege in the first place, okay? And so, but that's kind of a difficult first step sometimes, and sometimes people feel guilty about it, and James in the clip there, he kind of acted guilty, and he was, oh God, and I think he was kind of being funny, but a lot of people do feel that way. They feel uncomfortable, they feel guilty, they don't want to acknowledge or admit that they have privilege. But I think I think we move the conversation forward. I think things get better when we can simply just acknowledge what it is, right? We have an unequal society. Some people have advantages and opportunities that other people do not have. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault that that's the way things are, but we can use the power that we have in order to fight for other people, right? We can use the power we have to try to make things equal, okay? And I think James, even though he's being a little bit funny about it, I think that's what he's doing. He's using his privilege for good things. I did ask you this question, and so I'm not sure what you'll say or what you want to say, but can you think of a specific way in which you have privilege? And so again, it could have to do with race, could have to do with gender, could have to do with economic class, it could have to do with religion, could have to do with sexuality. What did you say for that? Or did you say anything for that? I'm curious. Let's see, ways in which you are privileged. Think of things that you can do that maybe people of other minoritized groups cannot. Okay, so Karen says sign petition. Okay, and help minorities to convince the government to change law. Okay, so that's something you can do with the social power you have, right? You can. Does Kim Kardashian have a petition? We can definitely sign petitions. Kind of what I was thinking about here is, here's an example. If you are heterosexual, okay, if you are straight, in most countries or in many countries, you can walk down the street with your girlfriend holding her hand, okay? Now, if you're a guy. And so I know there's cultural differences in terms of sort of public displays of affection, but in lots of countries around the world, heterosexuals, straight people are the dominant group. And so boyfriends and girlfriends and husbands and wives can walk down the street holding each other's hand, and nobody thinks twice, nobody notices it. But if two men walk down the street who are gay and they're holding each other's hand, do people notice? Do people look, right? Sometimes no, sometimes nobody cares, but sometimes yes, right? And so that's a little bit of straight privilege, if you will, is that you can walk down the street with your husband, wife, boyfriend, or girlfriend. If you are straight, you can hold their hand, you can give them a little kiss. In most places or in many places, nobody pays attention, nobody cares. But if you're two gay men, in some places people do pay attention, people do notice, and they may react. Manish says, being in contact or associated with people that have privileges. I guess that's true, right? If you are part of a dominant group, sometimes it's very easy to find yourself in the company of other people in the same dominant group, and it's more unlikely that you would be surrounded by people of a minoritized group. Another way maybe I'll suggest to you here that, again, in ways that you're privileged, boys are generally socialized to be um, louder, more confident, more bold, more outspoken. And so often when you're in a group setting, like a class, boys will often feel more comfortable speaking up, right? They'll feel more confident saying things to the teacher. Girls sometimes will feel less confident, and so sometimes when you're having a discussion, um, at least from my experience anyway, often it's the guys who will do most of the talking and the girls will say less. And again, that's because boys have been socialized to be that way, to be a little more confident or a little more outspoken. And generally, society listens to men more than it listens to women. And so that's one way in which privilege can play out in a group. And it can be in a classroom, it can be in a meeting. Um, yeah, it can be all of those things or all of those places. Okay. Um, I feel like we might still be a little fuzzy on this concept, um, but I think it might be time for a break. So let's take a quick break, and when you come back, we will talk about that little micro essay thing that I would like you to, or micro paper thing that I would like you to do. So take a break, stretch your legs, refocus, and then I'll see you back here shortly and we'll talk about that, okay? So see you in a bit. Okay, and we're back. So, um, my feeling is that we're kind of a little fuzzy on the concept of privilege, and I might be wrong, but I kind of feel like we're not quite where I want us to be on that. So, but maybe we'll press pause on it. Sorry, press pause on it for now, and we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it Monday morning, and we'll take another shot at it and see how we do. Okay, so I think we're partway there, but I think we just need to put a little more work into it. But for now, press pause, and we'll talk about this micro paper thing that I want you to do. Okay, now my intention here, or my hope here, is that we want to work a little bit on our investigative skills, on our analytical skills, and on our writing skills. And my theory on this is that if you can write something really good that's short, then you can write something that's really good that's long. Okay, so if you can write a good 1-page paper, you can write a good 30-page paper. It's just more work. Okay, that's my going theory anyway. And so that's what I want you to do. I want you to write a kind of a research paper, but one that's really, really short and really, really kind of basic. Okay. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. No, it's not just you, Erica. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thanks for letting me know. Let me start. Let me start again. Okay. Um, you can probably hear me now. Okay, here we go. This is what I said that you missed. Um, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to do a little micro paper, and yeah. So okay, this is what you missed. You're welcome, Erica. Thank you so much for telling me. I didn't realize that it was on mute. Okay. So as you can see here, a micropaper is a little 1-page paper, and so it's just like a larger paper that I might assign to you, or that I would assign to you, but it's just smaller. And so you can see I've created this little colored graphic here. It'll have a really short introduction, maybe a couple of sentences or something. It will have the summary of an article, so you'll find an article and read it and understand it and figure out the author's argument, and then you'll kind of summarize it in that green section. You'll respond to it somehow, so you'll say, I agree with this author because blah blah blah, or I think this is an important issue to discuss because blah blah blah. You'll say something in response to the article that you've read. You'll have a short little conclusion at the end, maybe a couple of sentences or something, and then you will cite your source at the end in MLA format. So again, it's got kind of all the pieces of a larger paper, but it's small. Okay. So kind of what I want to see you do here is I want you to be able to find and evaluate information, and we'll talk about that very shortly, although we don't have too much time left. I'll try to move it along here. I want to see you think critically, and so I want to see you be able to figure out an author's argument, to understand what they're trying to get you to believe, and then to assess it, to see if you actually believe what's being said. And then finally to come to some sort of understanding about that, okay? So, and I think this is an important skill because, again, when you can do your own research and when you can understand an issue, doing your own homework on it, then you can kind of come to your own decisions, right? You don't have to rely on what I tell you or on what anyone tells you. If you can do your own research and you can understand what people are suggesting to you, you can make your own decisions. You can empower yourself to understand things in your own way. Okay. All right. So this is how you'll go about this thing. Okay. You'll find a credible, and we'll talk about that in a minute, article with an argument that you can summarize. I don't want the article to be too long. It should be a short one. And so maybe a page or two. Again, this is not supposed to be a massive assignment. This is supposed to be a small one in which you are, it's not supposed to be huge. So you find a short article with an argument that you can summarize. I want you to read the article, of course. I want you to understand it, and I want you to figure out their argument. You will summarize that argument, and that goes into that green section that you saw before. You will provide your personal perspective. So you'll say whether you believe this person's argument or whether you disagree, because it's okay to disagree too. You'll add a little introduction and conclusion. You'll cite your source, and then you're all done. Hopefully easy peasy. I'd like to be able to hand this in next Friday. And again, I meant to sort of assign this to you a day or so earlier, but I kind of ran out of time. Sorry, I just had to sneeze. I ran out of time, and so I'm assigning it a little later than I would like. But I think it's okay. I think we should be able to finish this in a week, because again, it's not supposed to be massive. It's not supposed to be super difficult. It's supposed to be fairly easy. But that said, I do want you to do a good job on it. These little papers are kind of taking the place of exams in this course, so it still has to be good, right? It still has to be properly written. Okay, so I'll post that little sheet in Student Portal and on Microsoft Teams just after we're done here so that you can have it. But for right now, I just wanted to move on to something that's important in terms of finding credible sources, okay? Because I'm going to ask you to, I'm asking you to find an article that is connected to stereotypes or prejudice or discrimination of some type, okay? I'm fairly flexible in terms of what the topic is. You can look for something that interests you, or you can just find something that works. Either way is okay. But again, we have to make sure that whatever we're working with is quality information, okay? Because there's a lot of questionable information out there. There's a lot of material that is not well researched or poorly argued or is just flat out false. And so we don't want to use any of that, okay? So how do we find credible, believable articles, okay? And there's basically two ways. So one way is you can go through the college library. And if you go through the college library, you will probably, most of what you will find is probably quality material, okay? You can probably safely assume that it is all reasonable, credible, quality stuff, okay? So if you go through the college library, you can go to the website here. You can see the little library thing that you click on at the top. You can go to find materials here, just like we did for Mean Girls, but this time you'll go to databases, A to Z. And so in that screen, it'll list a bunch of databases. You can see here there's lots of them. Some of them will take you to databases that are more academic, and so you'll find a lot of academic journal articles. Those are kind of too big and too complicated for us. And so what I would suggest to you is go to this one here, MAS Ultra. And if you click on it, it'll take you to a window that kind of looks like this. And you can add your search terms into the top part here. So you can add stereotypes or prejudice or discrimination or something in these top little fields here. Once you do that, I would suggest that you check off these here so you can see the full text. You want to be able to see the full article. And I would probably check off magazines and newspapers here, and that will restrict you to kind of shorter articles that are easier to deal with. That's probably what I would do. And so if you do that, that will probably take you to articles that you can use for this assignment. Now, what I've found is that when I've offered that to students, most students don't really like to do that. They prefer to just go on the internet and find stuff out, out in the wild, if you will. And that's okay too, but you have to be a little more careful out there because there's all kinds of quality and very non-quality sources out there. And again, we have to be able to tell the difference. And so here's a very quick and easy guide to figuring out if you have a quality source or not. And this is a bit of a skill. The more you do it, the better you get at figuring out what kind of stuff should be believed and what kind of stuff shouldn't be believed. But these are the things to think about when you're looking at an article and you're trying to decide whether it's usable or not, or whether you should believe it or not. So there's accuracy, there's author, there's currency, there's fairness, and there's relevance, okay? So in terms of accuracy, this takes a little bit of practice to kind of identify things that are false in the article. Obviously, you don't want to check every little detail. But if you see information that is obviously wrong, that's a bit of a red flag, right? If you see typos and spelling mistakes and weird grammar things, that's a bit of a red flag, right? And again, this might be a little bit difficult to figure out too, but the tone of the article. And so does it sound kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Does it sound professional, right? Is it written in a way that sounds like the person knows what they're talking about? Okay, and again, it takes some time sort of to develop that skill, but that's part of accuracy. Author is important too. So do you actually know, can you determine who published this or who wrote this piece that you're looking for? If you can figure out, if there's an author and they're listed, can you Google them and see who they are? Are they a professor of sociology somewhere? Or, do they work out of their basement? Which doesn't necessarily mean they're totally uncredible, but the more you can figure out who someone is, the more information you have about whether you can believe them or not, right? So try to look for articles that actually have an author where you know the person who wrote it, okay? Or at least you can determine who wrote it. Um, Currency. So is this information current? So have a look and see when the article was published or when it was put up on the website, right? Did it go up there last week or last month or last year? Or, is it an article from the 1990s? Usually it's better if things are more recent, okay? Fairness. So is the article reasonably balanced? Now, an article doesn't have to not take a side because we're actually looking for argument or looking for articles that have an argument in them. But are they presenting their argument in a fair way, or are they are they being sensational? Are they trying to make you afraid of something? That's something to watch for as well. And of course, relevance. So is the article you're looking for aligned with what you're trying to research? Okay, and that should be kind of an easy one. So that's kind of what I want you to do. I want you to find an article, not very long, maybe a page or so. Hopefully it will have an argument about stereotypes or prejudice or oppression. There's probably lots of stuff out there right now given what's happening in the United States, but there always is lots of stuff out there. I want you to find an article, figure out the argument in it, and then write a short one-page paper. And again, try to make sure that you have a reliable source to work with, that the article is good. Now, if you're looking for something, if you're looking for an article and you're not sure about it, or even if you're half sure about it, send me a quick email just with the link and say, hey, is this okay? And then I can look at it and I can kind of give you the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Casey says, can it be from your own country? Yes, but I'd like it to be in English, just in case I need to go back to the article and try to figure out what they're saying versus what you're saying, okay? So it can be from anywhere in the world, but I would like to be able to read it in English, okay? Yeah, so you'll need to find an article that you can summarize and sort of write your short one-page paper on, okay? That'll be your sort of immediate job, and I would try to do that. If I were you, I would try to do that today or tomorrow, okay? Just try to find the article and make sure you have a good one. Again, if you want to send me a quick email or a Microsoft Teams message with the link and say, hey, do I have a good one? Then I can look at it really quickly and say, yes, this will work, or no, probably not, okay? So yeah, that will kind of be your homework. So maybe what I'll do is I'll leave it there. I know that's a little more rushed than I meant it to be, but that's kind of what's happened here. I will post the assignment for you on Student Portal and in Microsoft Teams. I'll also post a bit of a marking guide for you so that you know what I'm looking for when I mark it. I just need a little more time to finish that, so I'll have that up probably by tomorrow so you can see that. And again, if you have questions or if you have an article that you think might work but you're not really sure, send me the link and then I can sort of let you know yes or no, okay? Other than that, I think I'll let you go because we only have a few more minutes here. I hope everyone has a good weekend. Find your article and read it. Otherwise, try to relax a little bit if you can. Next week, we will finish off the oppression and power thing. We'll talk just a little more about privilege because I think we need to. And then we'll move on to racism, which is obviously something that's very topically relevant right now. So that said, thank you all for being here this morning. It was lovely to talk to you and interact with you. Yeah, I think that's all I have. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you on Monday, okay? Or I'll talk to you on the weekend about your article if you want, okay? So see you.